I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1873 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, we're going to talk about one of the big nemesis of the Vietnam War that is still with us today. Many Vietnam veterans have either died from exposure to Agent Orange or they're suffering from diseases caused by that exposure to this day. I have talked about Agent Orange and covered stories about it, both to the people who had boots on the ground and the Blue Water Navy Vietnam veterans who had to fight for decades to get the VA to do what was right, provide them with equity in Agent Orange benefits. Finally, they got it. It took an act of Congress to force the VA to do what is right. In this episode, I'm going to share a story with you that comes out of the great state of Connecticut about a Vietnam veteran who was exposed to Agent Orange during the war, has suffered from it, and he is doing something about it. He's working to create an Agent Orange monument at the Andover Veterans Monument Park up there in beautiful Connecticut. I'm sharing his story with you because it gives a personal viewpoint of someone who was connected with the application of that super weed killer over there in Vietnam, what he went through over there while he was in country, and what's happened to him down through the years. This veteran is Gerry Wright. Lives up there in one of those beautiful little towns just east of Hartford, Connecticut. A note here about the great state of Connecticut. I have visited that state, and I was always impressed with how beautiful it was there and how many old houses are still there. That is a tremendous testimony to the people who live in that state because they've maintained the greatness of it ever since the Europeans came to that area 300 or 400 years ago. Many places have a tendency to deteriorate as years go by, verifying the second law of thermodynamics. But not in Connecticut. Those wonderful people up there do a great job of maintaining that great state. Okay, enough about that. By the way, I did not receive any compensation from the Connecticut Chamber of Commerce to say that. That comes straight from my heart about that state. The story I'm going to share with you is titled, Andover Vet Hopes to Build Memorial to Agent Orange Veterans. This story appeared in the Journal Inquirer. It was submitted by none other than mfrance. She is a writer for the Journal Inquirer. If you would like to contact her, her contact information, namely her email address, will be on the show notes for this podcast over at the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com. Check out episode 1873. Without any further ado, let's take a look at Vietnam veteran Gerry Wright's Agent Orange story. Be prepared, it's gripping. I also encourage you to get rid of all the distractions in your immediate vicinity. That means turn off the TV, the radio, your cell phone. Run out all the noisy people in your immediate vicinity so you can hear this very important story. I also encourage you to go over to the podcast website, not only to find mfrance's email address. There will be a picture on the show notes for this episode, number 1873, of Gerry Wright himself. When you see the determined look on his face, I have a feeling that monument will become a reality. Do yourself a favor and go over and check out this wonderful representative of the great Vietnam veteran generation, one as great as any that ever heeded the call of duty from its country. I'll guarantee. Let's take a look at the story. Dateline, Andover, Connecticut. When Gerry Wright was a young man serving in the Army in Vietnam, he sprayed Agent Orange from a tanker truck onto the vegetation where the enemy could hide and onto himself. I did not know what it was, he said during a recent interview. No hat, no shirt, no gloves. I just remember getting a blast back and burning my nose. Agent Orange was used extensively during the Vietnam War to clear vegetation that could be used as cover. At the time, it was great, he said. It wasn't until years later that he learned how exposure to the chemical would affect him and thousands of others, too late in some cases to qualify for benefits from the Department of Veterans Affairs. We've been fighting this for 55 years, Wright said during the interview at the Veterans Memorial Park, where he hopes to erect a monument to those affected by Agent Orange, including those who have died and those who have survived with related health conditions, as well as their families and friends. That's right. Agent Orange continues giving. There are cases out there of where 2 generations down from the Vietnam veteran who was exposed are experiencing those terrible medical conditions caused by exposure. It's passed on. Continuing with the story. Wright pointed around him at the forest and heavy brush that stands well above his head around the memorial park. Within 3 days, all that right there would be twigs if sprayed with Agent Orange, he said. Wright said he was asked to spray roughly every 2 months during his 18 months in country. The herbicides were also dropped from planes over the jungles, Wright said, sometimes landing in bodies of water, and when it rained, the chemical washed into the rivers and basins and eventually into the South China Sea, where the Blue Water Navy veterans ran into it, and they're suffering today from the chemicals that were washed into the South China Sea. We were scooping this water up, taking it back to our compounds, drinking it, showering in it the whole time, he said. Wright began having symptoms from his exposure to the chemicals, from severe rashes to blisters the same year. In 1973, he went into cardiac arrest before finding out he had heart disease and other ailments from the chemical exposure. That would really ruin your day if you had a heart attack because of Agent Orange. Over the years, Wright has advocated at the state and national capitals for better medical coverage for veterans from the Department of Veterans Affairs. He was a guest of Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. Pardon me just a few minutes while I pause this recording and go throw up. Every time I hear the name Richard Blumenthal, I think about the line SOB who claimed he served in Vietnam with the U.S. Marines when actually he never set foot in that country. He is what you call a valor thief. Christians are supposed to forgive people, and sometimes it is an awfully hard thing to do. I'm going to give it a shot, though. Anyway, Gerry Wright was the guest of the senator at the 2018 State of the Union address for his work advocating for veterans exposed to Agent Orange. You know how during the State of the Union messages, different people will have guests up in the gallery? Gerry Wright was one of those in 2018. That must have been a wonderful experience. Continuing with the story. Agent Orange is linked to several types of diseases, including various cancers. However, VA benefits have limitations on coverage of some that allow benefits only if the person affected files within a year of exposure to the chemical. But they did not tell us for 8 years, Wright said. That sounds like one of those catch-22 situations. Wright has raised awareness for the cause by riding his motorcycle around the country with the words, "Sprayed and betrayed," and "I was killed in Vietnam, I just haven't died yet," sprawled across his bike. To date, he has driven more than 22,000 miles and collected nearly 7,200 signatures on a petition supporting legislation to remove the end dates on treatments. We are trying so hard to keep it in the limelight to let people know that we're still out there fighting for this, he said. Now, Wright wants to honor veterans exposed to Agent Orange right in Andover. Standing on the green at the corner of Route 6 and 316, Wright points to an outline of white spray paint in the grass where he envisions an Agent Orange monument being placed that would honor those lives. Over 250,000 vehicles a week will see it and be reminded of what our government did to us and is still doing to our veterans, Wright said. Wright is trying to raise $25,000 for a monument at the Veterans Monument Park. So far, he has raised $8,000 by taking to social media and distributing flyers to local businesses. The monument will be made by Nolan's Hamden Monument Company, whose artist etches everything free-handed with diamond pens, according to Wright, who is also working with the sketch artist with the Coventry Police Department to design the back of the monument. Should all go as planned, the monument will be unveiled in late spring and early summer of 2021. That's only 6 months away. They're going to have to get to work. Continuing. This monument will be dedicated to every veteran, every family member, and anybody that was poisoned by our government by a dioxin called Agent Orange. This reminder of this monument is for future generations not to make the same mistake that our government did in 1961, Wright said. Here is the key part I want you to listen to very carefully. Donations can be dropped off at the American Legion Post 95, 18 Main Street in Hebron, Connecticut. Checks should be made out to American Legion Post 95 and can be mailed to the Post, care of Gerry Wright, P.O. Box 95, Hebron, Connecticut 06248. Here's the good part. Donations are tax deductible. Gerry does have a Facebook page. The link to that Facebook page will also be on the show notes of episode 1873 over at the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast website. I encourage everyone in the state of Connecticut to go over to the American Legion Post 95 in Hebron and give them a check. I say everyone in the state because Connecticut is a rather small state. When you grow up in states like Florida and Alabama, those states are pretty big. Up in Connecticut, I spent some time up there once with a good buddy I have over in Meriden, Connecticut. I was surprised at how you could go to so many states in a 2-hour drive up there. Those states are small. Please go over and make a contribution. Even if you live in the state of Rhode Island, or the state of Massachusetts, or even New York. You might live in Poughkeepsie, New York. It's not a long drive over to Andover or Hebron, just on the other side of Hartford. I encourage you to support this effort to get this Agent Orange monument erected. Now, for the rest of you people listening in on this podcast, I don't care if you're in Western Australia or Eastern Canada or Kansas, Missouri, Maine, California, Alabama, Mississippi, or Alaska. Please help Vietnam veteran Gerry Wright get this monument erected on schedule. All of these Vietnam veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange and are suffering from it deserve our attention and gratitude. The best way to show that is send Gerry a check. It does not have to be a big one. It could be $5. It could be $10. It could be $20. I recently sent a check to the 1st Cab Division out at Mineral Wells, Texas, for $20 to cover the cost of the calendar they send out and the newspaper they put out 4 times a year. Didn't hurt a bit. I am also going to write another check out. It'll be somewhere between $10 and $20, made out to Gerry Wright up in Hebron, Connecticut, to help get this monument built. That's the least we can do to show our appreciation to our Vietnam veterans. They served us well in Vietnam, and they've continued to serve the country for 50 years after that war. This is the least we can do. If you're willing to help out, I would like you to raise your hand right now and say, I will sit down right now and write a check to Gerry Wright up in Hebron, Connecticut, to help him get this Agent Orange monument constructed. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. All the contact information you need will be over on the show notes for this podcast episode 1873 at the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast website. It's very easy to remember, VietnamVeteranNews.com. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1873. Thank you very much for coming to listen to these programs. You are cordially encouraged to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?